Hello friends, and welcome to my today's lecture on Sylvia Plath's poem Lady Lazarus. In my last lecture on the short note on Sylvia Plath, I had spoken about Plath being a modern confessional poet whose experiences were recorded in a book called Letters Home and were edited by her mother. I had also mentioned Sylvia Plath as Sylvia Plath's life being affected by a father who was a strict disciplinarian. I had also mentioned Sylvia being scared and terrified because of her father's strictness, and that she had started writing at a very early age and was a very good student right from the beginning of her school life. And her publications later on revealed an examination and analysis of the darker recesses of the soul. I had also mentioned about her close relationship with her mother and her mother's characteristics playing a great role in understanding Sylvia Plath, and the poems that she had written like Daddy, etc. And also that Sylvia Plath was a very sensitive person, and which is aptly clear from the picture incident. And this sensitivity gave great tragic dimensions to her life. And her teacher had once said about her that one so young could have appreciated something so devastatedly. She was in favor of giving more authority to readers to interpret the poetry the way the reader wanted. We can always see the tragic note that is prominently present in Sylvia Plath's poem, and there are many more aspects of her which we would come to know, or rather would be revealed when we try to follow some of her poems. Today I'll be doing Lady Lazarus, one of our very famous poem. Now, Lady Lazarus is a poem which is written by Sylvia Plath and was included in Ariel. It's a collection of poems which was published in the year 1965, 2 years after her death by suicide. Now, this poem is commonly used as an example of her writing style. Lady Lazarus is a bitter dramatic monologue famous for the themes of death and oppression. This poem gives hint to the multiple suicide attempts of the tormented speaker. It also highlights the role of power and oppression in one's life. The poem is Sylvia's most mature attempt to make sense of her mental illness, which leads to previous unsuccessful suicidal attempts. Her family, that is her father and mother, her ex-husband, and the cruelty, dehumanization, and absurdity of the modern world. Sylvia Plath takes her images from mythology like the phoenix and from religion, history, contemporary life, and events. She universalizes her images. Her personal experiences and universal events, they are merged together, or they are one in her subconscious mind. Plath was a strong feminist, as we would come to know when we read through her poems. And women have basically greater imagination and singleness of purpose, as is evident in her poetry. She also had a vision of future in which men and women ceased to exist as he and she, and they were purely human beings. Sylvia was extremely sensitive, as I told, and her poetry is compulsive of all confessional poetry, where one writes to satisfy his inner voice, or else her life would not be peaceful. And so we see that Sylvia has been self-critical, and she had terrible ego also. She loved her face and flesh, and she also loved freedom deeply. Now I would be explaining a few paragraphs today and the remaining poem in the coming lectures. Now her poem reads, the first paragraph, as I see, I have done it again. 1 year in every 10 I manage it. Now, the name Lady Lazarus is basically a biblical character who had died and was brought back to life by Jesus Christ. She talks about, Sylvia addresses herself as Lady Lazarus because, as she says, she has attempted suicide many a times, and every time she has managed to be alive. Now, Lady Lazarus here is a Qazi mythological figure, which is like a phoenix, in which the woman gets reborn after many deaths. Now, in the context of this poem, we see that dying is attempted every time, and some unsuccessful suicidal attempts. And this poem tells us about 3 of her attempts during her 30 years of life. Now, in this first paragraph, as she says, I have done it again. That means she has already done the same thing earlier also, and this is her third attempt. It was in a way very involved with suicide. Now this poem deals with suicide as an event, like as any other event in her life, and she's looking at that fact of suicide ironically. If you see it, she was just 30-year-old and she had already attempted suicide thrice to put an end to her life. Now the first attempt was just an accident, but still she considers it as an attempt, and she says that I managed to make those attempts every time. Now when we read through the second and third paragraph, which reads, a sort of walking miracle, my skin bright as a Nazi lampshade, my right foot a paperweight, my face a featureless fine jewel linen. Now she talks of herself as a living miracle on this earth, and she says that her skin is totally white and bright as a Nazi lampshade, which is made from the skin of dead Jewish Holocaust victims. And she says her right foot is very heavy like a paperweight, and her face is a featureless fine jewel linen cloth that she talks about. Now in these two paragraphs we see that Sylvia looks at herself objectively. She says that after all these attempts in her life, her existence itself has become a miracle. After every attempt, she survives miraculously. Now she considers her body in fragments, and these are the various things which make her body, like her skin, which is as a Nazi lampshade, her right foot as a paperweight, and her face as a Jew linen cloth. She might mean that though her body survives, but the soul that is there in her body, it has actually died. Now, the images of Nazis and Jews that she talks about signifies sufferers, victims, and Nazis signifies the victimizers and the tyrants. Now, this is how Sylvia identifies herself with the Jews, because she considers herself a victim, a sufferer throughout her life. Also, because of her Australian background. Here she compares her skin with Nazi lampshade. So she is not only the sufferer but also the victimizer in that sense. Now these images, they keep on recurring in the poem of the victimized as well as victimizer, the Nazi and the Jew, that is the oppressor and the oppressed. Now more explanation of the other paragraphs of a poem I'll be doing in the next lecture of mine. Till then, goodbye and thank you, friends.